안녕하세요. 저는 코트라 실리콘밸리 무역관의 임동규입니다. 이번 세션은 인디고텍에서 VP of Product Management로 일하고 계신 조나탄 리 님께서 마이크로 모빌리티의 미래에 대해서 웨비나를 나누고자 합니다. 여기서부터는 영어로 진행하겠습니다. 온라인의 특성상 통역이 제공되지 않습니다. 양해 부탁드립니다. 그리고 영상부터 보시고 소개해 드리도록 하겠습니다.
With a rising population, increased emissions, and strengthening CO2 regulations, we're heading toward a paradigm shift in transportation. Autonomy. 100% electric. Ride sharing. It's not just necessary, it's inevitable. The traditional vehicle architecture will not meet these demands. Not even the current electric solutions will suffice. Simply put, small measures aren't enough. It's time to reinvent the wheel. Meet Indigo. It starts right here in the wheel. Traditionally, hub motors have failed because they weren't dynamic or practical enough. Indigo's breakthrough solution is an active suspension system that's intrinsic to the motor's design, allowing for safety, comfort, and efficiency. And the cost for all this? Far less than you'd think when it's done our way. By integrating this active suspension, we create a safer ride with improved handling. With the Indigo traction motor, the vehicle has unparalleled control so it doesn't lose traction. Our proprietary software responds rapidly to hills and curves in the road, helping to solve one of the great challenges for autonomous vehicles: motion sickness. Partnering with Indigo will solve for the new generation of automobile consumers that demand efficiency and autonomy. It means being the first to achieve true vehicle design flexibility, the first to optimize efficiency tenfold and allow for more cabin space. It means greater safety and comfort than traditional in-wheel motors. It means drastic cost efficiency across the board. It means writing the unwritten chapter in the story of transportation. That's where we are today. Imagine where we'll be tomorrow. Say hello to Indigo.
Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. If you could continue from here, that would be very nice. Thank you.
안녕하세요. I need to learn a little bit more Korean, but a very big pleasure to be with everybody here tonight. Thanks everybody for your time, and I'd like to share with everybody some thoughts about the future of micromobility and ultimately how Indigo can be part of that story. But with that, let's first think about micromobility. That's really a solution. So the question is, what is the problem? Well, the problem really is, how do you get from your home to some mass transportation, from that mass transportation then to your destination? That first and last mile challenge is really one that makes or breaks the effectiveness of mass transportation like subways and buses. If we take a step forward and say, well, in recent years, we see a lot of these electric scooters, a lot of these bicycles appearing. And this is what the industry now calls micromobility. Smaller vehicles that let you address that first and last mile. But the reality is that it's not just these past few years that this concept has been around. Really, since the 60s, so in this case, in 65 or so, the Dutch introduced this white bicycle plan, where they would leave white bicycles around the city of Amsterdam for you to pick up and use as you need it. The problem, though, is that people are people, and so these things were stolen. These things were parked in Amsterdam's famous canals, basically vandalized. And so it didn't really work out long term, but that concept was there. And not just Amsterdam, but many cities around the world were starting to look at, especially in the 60s, as mass transportation systems were being developed, how do you get people to and from these transportation solutions? Now, fast forward to recently, where we see in many cities now these scooters, these bicycles, that through your mobile phone, you're able to then go and access and pay for it and use. The problem, though, is that these are still being vandalized. These are still not necessarily the safest things to ride. You'll see people riding them along through the sidewalk, even in and out of pedestrians. And then, of course, you have the problem that they just leave them everywhere. And so they litter the sidewalk and become a big nuisance. Of course, you have solutions like docking stations. You have city ordinances to try to solve some of these problems because, again, these are really solving that first and last mile challenge. But in the end, there's still the problem of weather. Once you have a light dusting of snow, these things then become useless. Also, you don't really see many elderly men and women on these devices because it's not that inclusive. So then one might say, well, there's obviously ride sharing. What about Ubers and Lyfts of the world? Well, the problem with Ubers and Lyfts is that they're not necessarily accessible to everybody. If you look at the cost structure of operating these things, once you take the driver's costs, including the operational cost of the vehicle, including insurance, all these things added together, and then you bring that final price with a profit to the end user, a lot of people actually, especially if you don't have a mobile phone, can't even access these services. And so then the question is, well, what if you see autonomous driving becoming extremely popular today? I'm sure soon enough there will be robo-taxis, so you can remove a big cost component. That might be one solution, but the question is, when? When will this really happen? If you look at McKinsey, they did a study last year, or at least released the results last year. They estimate by 2030 that $300 to $500 billion of micromobility market will be there. Now, despite such a large number, they still realize that because of weather, fitness, everything we just talked about, micromobility, these scooters and bicycles, really only will capture 8 to 15% of that $300 to $500 billion market. So then what fills that void? Well, now we bring in the mini mobility, that's what I like to define it as. Really, from the bicycle to the full sedan, there's a space of smaller vehicles, more personal vehicles that may be more efficient. Again, this is not a new idea either. If you look in the 50s, BMW released the Isetta 250. It was also in 1959 or so that the British Motor Company introduced the Mini, what you see today as the Mini Cooper. So these ideas of a smaller vehicle to really be personal, be efficient, cost-effective was really around since then. But how is it different today? Well, today, electrification, right? Once you take electric-driven propulsion systems to replace the gas-driven ones, if you look on the upper left here, the gas-driven, all the complexities and the inefficiencies there replaced with electric. As you can see here, the skateboard design from our company, we put the motors in the wheel. So you further reduce complexities and you open up a lot more space, gives these vehicles a lot more opportunity for different configurations. On top of that, Indigo provides this hub wheel motor with active suspension. So we're able to make the ride much more comfortable in these smaller vehicles because we have active suspension built into the wheel, making it much more robust, much more simple, and ultimately much more efficient. On top of that, with car design and our fast charging technologies, including AI-driven battery management, we're really able to get that low cost per mile down. At the same time, with our founder's background of finance, he's bringing the fintech side to the equation. So using creative financial models, a future gig worker can simply, using the mobile app, find a vehicle, find how much this vehicle costs per trip, pay insurance per trip to really minimize those upfront costs so that they can quickly get on the road and make their money delivering that package or delivering that passenger. If we take a quick look at the market today, there's actually already a number of smaller three-wheel, smaller four-wheel vehicles that are, whether it's in production, already produced, or about to be rolled out. It should be really exciting to see how these types of vehicles really start to populate city streets and really help to address that first and last mile challenge. And so with electrification, autonomous technology, truly inclusive vehicles, personal vehicles, I believe are just around the corner. And who knows, maybe in 5 to 10 years time, when you step off that train, this autonomous robotic personal taxi will come to pick you up and take you to your final destination. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for your attention and open up for any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing your innovative ideas about the future of micromobility. Now we're gonna have short Q&A time. We want to ask a few questions about your experiences, product management. Coming from a mobile and EV industry background, can you tell us about what kind of value and direction you look for when it comes to developing a product in micromobility?
Absolutely. So it's really the mobile technology, the nowadays 5G that's coming, that is enabling a lot of these things to happen. Right? So in addition to the demand side, the consumer, the user able to then on their phone, I mean, the phone is really the universal remote control. Through this device, you're able to on-demand call for services. And so one, how do you create that mobile experience so that it truly addresses the needs? Again, an elderly person may not have a smartphone, but how do you make that really achievable and reachable and really usable? Second side is that with these sort of mobile technologies, you're able to embed more and more of these sensors into the vehicles and devices. Right? So as 5G starts to roll out, the status and all these new models will really start to come out. And again, this is one area that Indigo is focused on, is really trying to bring this sort of constant stream of data, condition of the vehicle, and these type of things to really help build the pricing models and the new sort of financial models to allow for this type of vision to really happen.
Next, we know you have a past of entrepreneur experiences working with many highly talented engineers and managers in Silicon Valley. Can you share any success stories or challenges you had to face in the process?
Yeah, I think that the startup, I mean, if you want to be in movies, where do you go? You go to Hollywood, you go to Los Angeles, right? If you want to be in startup, it's the world comes to Silicon Valley. So what makes this place so unique, though, is that you do have this amazing talent that comes together, not only for building things, but also for financing and for really testing things out and getting things to market. I think a lot of the speakers, even though I didn't quite understand what they said, but I could, through their slides and sort of understanding the space they're in terms of failing fast, failing all of these sort of things, is true the mantra, right? It's about learning quickly, getting things out. And so in my past, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of great teams. And not all, they're only one Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, right? But it's really each startup where you build something unique, where you really hope to address that problem in the world, that you can really start to see some commercial success, some scaling of that solution, and really find that success, or learn in that process. And so I would say my biggest sort of takeaway in these few years in Silicon Valley is really that learning and meeting a lot of really great people along the way, such that it kind of makes it easier for the next startup and keep going from that point. So yeah, I would say it's a unique place. If people haven't come.
Definitely. In your presentation, you mentioned a lot of different micromobility vehicles. Do you believe companies will compete in producing the same type of micromobility vehicles, or compete to create a totally new type of vehicle that could differentiate from other companies? And how will IndigoTech differentiate from other companies?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. The reality is that there are, well, actually, here's an interesting statistic. Did you know that there are about 500 car manufacturers in China? At one point, maybe it was in the 50s or so, I forget exactly what point, there was a similar number in the world. But today there's only a few big ones, a few dozen companies because of all the consolidation, because the market cannot bear that much supply. The same will happen in China as well. But because they now have these larger manufacturers, there's still that innovative spirit, and it's still sort of that, let's solve that problem with the first and last mile challenge. And so you'll continue to see these sort of niche vehicles start to pop up. And so as I showed, there's definitely these vehicles starting to pop up because there's that solution, there's that problem to solve and that money to be made. Now, the focus of these different companies will really drive what type of vehicles they produce. So there will likely be a lot of similar type of vehicles because once you have 2 wheels, 3 wheels, 4 wheels, you can only do so much with it. But, and here's where Indigo comes in, our focus is obviously the vehicle. It's got to be super efficient, and really we have a decade's worth of technology to bring to the table as we showed in the video. But we also have that financial component to really try to bring a new focus and a new type of vehicle to the market. And so with that as well, I mean, we are hoping through opportunities to speak at events like this, find partners to be part of that story as well, because one company cannot do it alone. It really takes an ecosystem of partners to do that.
Thank you. Speaking of partnerships, has IndigoTech worked with Korean companies in the past? If so, what kind of different technologies in IndigoTech are you guys looking for when it comes to partnering up with Korean companies?
Yeah, today we haven't worked with Korean companies or many companies really. The company only came out of stealth about a year ago. And it's pretty much been in the lab, building. And so whether it's Korean companies or any company, we are looking for companies who are interested to take the journey with us by one, helping us to manufacture. See this beautiful motor behind me. How do we manufacture these motors with active suspension? How do we then get the right supply chain and other things in place to supply the whole vehicle on a very efficient, very affordable manner? And so in addition to this sort of helpful motor, as I mentioned in the slides, we also have a fast charging wireless technology. We also have this intelligent battery management system based on neural network, based machine learning. So all of these components we're also looking to license and find customers to build into their products, as well as I said, work together to build vehicles.
Thanks so much. Next question is totally about the whole situation of COVID-19. What kind of changes do you think that micromobility will bring to the situation right now?
For sure. I mean, we actually already see global demand for more personal vehicles because we want to avoid this exposure to other people. And so the need to really get from point A to point B in your own space is growing. So the problem with that is that only if you can afford it can you then have that personal transportation. And the frontline workers, people who are not able to afford their own vehicle, have to take public transportation still. So we only see an increasing need for these affordable solutions, especially first and last mile, as well as the whole trip. So we think that we have a lot to offer the world, especially looking at COVID and beyond. Unfortunately, these types of before COVID, there was the swine flu, there was SARS, there was MERS, all these things. These things aren't going to disappear forever. And so in that time, how do we keep people safe? We provide affordable transportation solutions.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to the vehicle from IndigoTech. Thank you for joining us today. Do you have any last comments that you want to say to the Korean and the viewers in the States?
Thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure to share some thoughts, and if you're interested to work together, very happy to have some discussions. So thanks again.
Thank you.
감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 시청해주신 분들 너무 감사드리고요. 이 세션은 여기로 마무리 짓고 이제 인사드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.